Michigan's second largest city. A city filled with vibrancy, priding itself on inclusion and innovation. A city with 200 dedicated firefighters, 45 square miles, 11 fire stations. The Grand Rapids Fire Department has one mission: value people by saving lives, protecting property, and responding to the needs of our community. A job not for the faint of heart. 200 dedicated firefighters taking the call to action. No matter the time, no matter the conditions, our firefighters provide the ultimate customer care. Who else would be willing to constantly go above and beyond, risking their lives for your safety? It takes honesty, integrity, loyalty, teamwork, and excellence. These 5 values are what set Grand Rapids firefighters apart from the rest. Are you ready? Michigan's second largest city. A city filled with vibrancy, priding itself on inclusion and innovation. A city with 200 dedicated firefighters, 45 square miles, 11 fire stations. The Grand Rapids Fire Department has one mission: value people by saving lives, protecting property, and responding to the needs of our community. A job not for the faint of heart. 200 dedicated firefighters taking the call to action. No matter the time, no matter the conditions, our firefighters provide the ultimate customer care. Who else would be willing to constantly go above and beyond, risking their lives for your safety? It takes honesty, integrity, loyalty, teamwork, and excellence. These 5 values are what set Grand Rapids firefighters apart from the rest. Are you ready?
Good evening and welcome to our very first digital town hall. So we're so excited to be doing this. We're trying something new, so we'll be looking for your feedback. Please let us know if you think this is a great format. We're trying this because we are looking at new ways to connect with community. We know that not everyone can make it down here to City Hall for our commission meetings, particularly the ones that happen during the day. So we're going to be using different platforms as we reach out to community and try to make sure that you are aware about what's going on here, but also have an opportunity to ask us questions. And I'm really delighted to be with our new city manager, Mark Washington. As you may recall, he joined our city back in October, and we are so excited to have him here. He has hit the ground running, and I'm sure you probably know last week was a crazy wintry week here in the city. Even though City Hall closed down, he was working overtime, as was all of our essential services. And so he is, I would say, well-versed and working hard here at City Hall. One of the big things that he has taken on since being here is really looking at a strategic plan for the city. And so what we've been doing over the last couple months, the City Commission has been actively engaged as we get together and we talk about what our priorities are and how do we embed that into a strategic plan. So the first part of tonight's town hall, we're going to update you on that work. We're going to fill you in on what we've been working on and some of the preliminary topics that are in the strategic plan, and then we'll open it up for questions. One last thing I'll share before we get started, and I turn it over to the city manager. Many of you know this, but I'll repeat it. Our government here in the city is unique in that we have a city manager form of government. And so often I get asked about this, especially when I'm out and about doing presentations. And so I'll just remind everyone that the city manager has a significant role to play in our city. The vast majority of city departments and city staff report to the city manager. So the City Commission, we appoint 4 appointed officials, the city clerk, city treasurer, city attorney, and the city manager. And then the other department heads report to the city manager, including the police chief and fire chief and parks and rec. So over 1,500 employees. Our city manager is responsible for the day-to-day operations, but also overseeing their work. So the City Commission, we set policy, we set budget, but then really it's ultimately up to the city manager to implement that and carry it out and make sure that we're moving in the same direction in unity and that we're all kind of walking together as we look to what we want to happen in the future. So tonight you're going to hear more about that, and I will now turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Grand Rapids. First of all, let me also echo my thanks and appreciation to many of our employees and first responders and public workers, safety workers who were helping to be responsive to the inclement weather and the snow plowers. You really did a great job, and I want to thank our community also for neighbors helping neighbors. In the middle of the snowstorm. It was just fantastic to see that type of collaboration among residents and our workforce, and so my appreciation to all of you. As the mayor indicated, I've been here about 4 months now, and one of the things that is real evident to me coming to Grand Rapids is that we've done a lot of great planning. I think our current master plan was done back in 2002, and there have been several updates since then, even with Green Grand Rapids and our vital streets and several other updates since the master plan, very much community engaged. And it was pretty evident to me that we needed to have, the master plan aligns us for a 20-30 year vision, but what we need in the interim is something to be more strategic that's not as long as the master plan, but shorter than the master plan, but longer than the 1-year fiscal plan for budgeting. And that is the reason why we are doing our strategic planning, which gives us a 3 to 5 year horizon. And tonight you should have access if you went to the city's website. We've had several conversations. I think our first was back in December, and our second was recently last month in January. And you should be able to go on the website online and see both the video recording from those meetings as well as the documents that were shared. And you would see those documents on our draft strategic plan. So as tonight, we would like to highlight some of the elements of the strategic plan, but also allow you an opportunity to submit any questions that you might have, whether those come through our Facebook or YouTube comment section. We certainly have staff here available, and they will be relaying the questions to us. We are going to attempt to field as many questions as we can But in the event that we're not able to answer all of them, we will answer all of them tonight. There will be posted responses to all of them, and we're committed to getting all of the questions back to you. So this, as the mayor said, this is our first time. We're going to try it. We won't be limited by this, but we'll also have a on-site town hall, in-person town hall update on the plan. We plan to do that. I believe the February the 18th and the 19th are the dates. February 19th and 20th are the dates that we'll have a on-site opportunity for you to come out and engage us physically. We'll also be talking about the qualities that we're looking for in our next police chief. We'll have a consultant in town that will be helping us with that community engagement. But as I began the conversation around our strategic efforts, I've had an opportunity to go to over 20 different work sites throughout the city. And talking to our employees, I've had a chance to meet with over 1,000 employees talking about values, because I believe the plan describes what we do, but it's also important to describe how we do it in terms of who we are and our values. And there are several values that I believe that are core for us as an organization. We've been talking to our commission about it. Our commissioners have been very engaged in helping us to affirm our values as an organization. And those values have centered around accountability. We want to be able to make sure that we do exactly what we promise to the public, and that we do what we say we're going to do. And secondly, equity has been, as our community continues to change and grow, we want to make sure we are a welcoming, inclusive, and diverse community. And so equity is very, very important. And we do things in a collaborative manner, both internally and externally. That I think one of the things that makes Grand Rapids very unique is the type of collaboration in the community, both with public and private partnerships, but also neighbors helping neighbors. And I think we've been challenged and poised to do things differently. And innovation is very, very important, that we think about how we can reimagine our community and deliver public services to our community differently in an innovative manner, keeping in mind the needs of our customers and making sure that we have a high level and outstanding and excellent customer service. And treating everyone with respect and dignity. And certainly we want to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable, both environmentally, sustainability in terms of how we improve the triple bottom line with people, planet, and prosperity, but also that we are sustainable and we have long-term solutions that will be resilient despite what the changes in the economy might bring. I think there's another slide that we're trying to pull up, or perhaps not.
All right. I'll add a few things and then I'll send it back over to the city manager. So a little bit about the strategic planning process. So as the city manager said, he spent a lot of time with a number of departments and really well over 1,000 city employees getting feedback. And then the City Commission, we've had two 3-hour work sessions where we work together to hone in and identify what our priorities will be. And smart leadership and really needs clear direction, and we need to have a strategy if we're going to be the city that we want to be. And so some of the priorities that the City Commission has talked about and that you'll see embedded in the strategic plan, we talked at length about our desire to be a welcoming city. We talked about making sure that people feel like they're connected, that they're informed. We talked about our desire to be a city where people feel like they belong, that it's not just that they're being welcomed into the city and people are kind, but they feel like this is a city where they belong. And so that's very important to us. We talked at length, as the city manager said, we talked about equity and making sure that as we make decisions, we're utilizing an equity lens, whether that's around policy or budget. We talked about wanting to be a city where, regardless of what your dreams are, you can find prosperity here, you can build wealth here. We know that there are issues right now in our city that we're facing that we must tackle around affordable housing. We want to be a safe city for everyone. No matter where you are in the city, you should feel safe. We want to be a city that is a great city for businesses, not just to start, but also to grow and to thrive. So we want to support businesses and entrepreneurs. And then it's really important that we're data-driven, that we're a city that looks at data, that we're informed as we make decisions. More importantly, that we identify what we want our outcomes to be, that we have metrics aligned with those, and that we're actually collecting the data, utilizing it, sharing the data openly with the community, but that we're making very data-driven decisions. And so with that, the city manager has partnered with the city commission as we've worked through the strategic planning process. And the draft you see before you tonight is really an accumulation of all of those conversations and the work sessions.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. I do want to reiterate how deliberate we've tried to be in our framing the strategic plan, and I'll share with you a framework, and you should be able to see this on your screen. If you look at the smaller triangle, I mentioned earlier that really the planning effort for a city or community really begins with a master plan. That is a 20 to 30 year horizon, our view of the future of the city. And then we've had the master plan, and if you look at the bottom of that inverted triangle, you'll see that the fiscal plan, the budget that gets approved every year. Even though there are capital projects that we look at 5 years, for the most part, we're approving an operating budget for 1 year at a time. And in the middle of the inverted triangle is what we're trying to accomplish now. What are the strategies that we need to begin looking at over the next 3 to 5 years that furthers the goals of the master plan, but also allows us to budget every year in order to ensure that we are meeting our strategic initiatives. So the right side up triangle that's on your screen, I mentioned earlier the values, the aspirational things that will allow us to begin planning strategically. We talked a little bit about the values. The commission has had a lot of discussion around the vision for our community. And we are known for a lot of things in this community. We're known as Furniture City and Cool City or Beer City, and there are lots of tags in this community, but I think we have engaged in real meaningful dialogue about what kind of vision do we have for our community and how do we want to be a vibrant, welcoming, inclusive community. And that is the conversation we're having now. And what you'll see in the draft documents is, as the mayor outlined earlier, those strategic priorities that we have, as we'll outline shortly, strategic priorities and outcomes for our communities. Just like we had 6 values, we're going to spend some time talking about those 6 strategic priorities and outcomes. And then what I'm excited about is once we began to solidify those areas, we've also talked about what type of objectives we want to see met and how do we know we're doing a good job. What are the strategies and metrics that we're going to use to hold ourselves accountable, to make sure that we're transparent and reporting to the commission, but also to the public. And ultimately, there's accountability in the plan. That accountability that gets deployed all the way down to the individual departments, and where they can have an indication of knowing whether or not we are meeting the goals and objectives, but also deploying those strategies and assignments to individual staff and making sure that staff are clear about their expectations, but also being held accountable in their annual performance evaluations. So, as we go over these areas, I'm hoping that some of you are beginning to submit your questions. I'll just highlight the first one. The mayor and I will just take turns in going through some of the strategic outcomes. So the first is affordability and a prosperous economy, or economic prosperity and affordability. And I think it's important that we have a lot of discussion now around housing affordability and making sure that as the cost of living continues to increase, as Grand Rapids continues to grow, that it is a community that remains affordable to everyone. And part of that is not just talking about how affordable or how low the cost of services are for city government, or how affordable we can make housing, but also to ensure that there is a wealth creation or wealth generation part with affordability, that we have jobs that pay or exceed a living wage, that we have small businesses that are able to thrive, and making sure that companies want to relocate, move jobs to Grand Rapids, and more importantly, that there are opportunities to hire local residents as part of those jobs. And certainly we also know that, again, housing supply is very important as we continue to grow, and making sure that there's all types of housing, that we have housing in both at market rate as well as affordable housing as part of our housing inventory.
So we also talked about, and you'll see this in the plan, wanting to make sure that we have an engaged and connected community. And so a couple priorities to us that you'll find embedded in that is we want to make sure that we have effective communication and outreach, both proactively and reactively. This has long been a conversation around the commission table. It's more challenging today than ever with the kind of current place we find ourselves in with social media and media in general. And so we know that we need to do a much better job of making sure that we're communicating effectively, and that we're communicating in a wide variety of ways to make sure that we're getting to every single resident, regardless of what their resources are. We've also talked at length, and you'll see this as well, about making sure that we're getting ongoing feedback from the community. And so one thing that we will be doing is we'll be doing a regular community survey, getting feedback from you to make sure that we know how we're doing and we are able to identify the areas that we need to improve. And the only way we can do that is if we're doing active engagement with the community and getting your feedback to make sure that we are being held accountable really by residents. And the only way we can do that is if we set up a structure in order to get that. So you'll find a number of goals related to communication. You'll see things like this, new strategies that we will try, like a digital town hall and other ways to get out and about, but also making sure that we're intentional when we are creating opportunities for the community to be engaged, making sure that we're getting out in the community, that it's well coordinated across departments, that we are not just in community, but we're providing support for families so that they can attend the meetings. And so all of that is included in this section of the strategic plan.
I think another element in terms of a priority for a growing and livable community is always to make sure that the community is safe. Mm-hmm. And that safety occurs in a variety of ways, that people are safe in their homes, they're safe when they're out in public, and it's very important that we have a police and fire department that keeps our community and our residents and tourists safe at all times. And so we have talked about several things, I think, this past week in terms of the inclement weather. I mean, safety, there's environmental safety, there's safety in terms of our health, but specifically when we're talking about the core elements of public safety, it's making sure that we reduce the criminal element within our community, and we're also able to protect our community from the spread and dangers and risk of fire. And those are the core elements of safety as we've defined it in the plan. And making sure that our police are able to respond, but also doing policing in a way that engages community and as part of a way of policing with community. I mentioned earlier we're in the process of searching for our new chief law enforcement officer, our police chief, and we will be working very collaboratively with community to get your feedback in terms of the type of qualities that you think that are important in the consideration of me hiring the police chief. But we'll also continue to think about what ways that we continue to make sure that our fire department is able to respond to emergencies and incidents. I'm very proud of the fire department for the recent accomplishment of achieving or helping our community to achieve the Class 1 ISO rating, which should provide several benefits. It should help to reduce the cost of insurance, but it also indicates the level of preparedness that we have in our fire department and our ability to respond to incidents. Likewise, it's very important that we have a well-prepared police department and law enforcement officers, and I think the recent achievement of the CLIA accreditation is an indication that we are doing some good things in the police department. We do know that there are opportunities to improve our effectiveness in both departments, and look forward to working with community in doing that.
So the next section of the strategic plan is around health and environment. And so how do we make sure that we're a city where the health and well-being of all people is focused on, as well as our environment, and that our environment is protected and is safe. And so under this section we have a number of goals, everything from home repair and lead abatement. Unfortunately, we know in our city we have seen over the last several years an increase in the number of children who test positive for lead, and we know that that's heavily concentrated in a handful of neighborhoods in our city. And so we are actively looking at what we need to do to enhance our lead abatement practices. We've already done a lot of work around lead abatement over the years. We've had a lead remediation program for a long time, but we definitely need to do more. And so this is a priority for us. It's a priority for a number of my colleagues on the commission, including Commissioner Lanier and Commissioner Rapart, who serve with me on a Lead-Free Kids committee. So that's embedded in this, but then looking at even a wider view. When you look at some of our goals around the environment, we want to make sure that we have clean air, and so we have to be looking at air quality. So that is directly connected to our physical environment and tree canopy. So we have goals related to increasing our urban canopy of trees. We know that that has a direct impact on stormwater runoff as well as air quality. We also have goals around green space. So we want to make sure that there is a park and a playground within safe walking distance of every child that lives in this city. And so you'll find we have our Parks and Recreation Plan, and we're pulling out elements of that that will be embedded into the strategic plan, because it all ties together as we look at not just the physical and emotional well-being of people, but also our environment, to make sure that those are tied together.
I think as we consider our growing community, the conversation around equity is certainly something that we've talked about with commissioners and with staff. And it is important that a couple of things. One, I think it's incumbent upon me as manager to make sure that our government is as diverse in terms of our workforce, as diverse to the extent possible as the community that we serve, and that we're able to have the cultural competency to appreciate a growing and diverse community. This month, for example, is the month of February is Black History Month, but it's also the month in which our Asian American Grand Rapidians have celebrated the Lunar New Year. I had the chance to share in both the Chinese and the Vietnamese New Year celebration. And so it's that kind of diversity that we need to be sensitive to. We have a growing Latino community, as well as African American community who, if you look at the data, continues to be in the marginalized or impacted area of some of the services where they are disparately impact in terms of certain outcomes. We know people of color have the highest probability of being unemployed, or people of color have the highest probability of being having housing being disrupted in terms of housing. And so we want to make sure that we evaluate all of the areas of our community where there are disparate impacts that are affecting people of color, and making sure that we have policies in place that helps to promote equity among various members of our community. The other area is governmental excellence. And I think this community demands and deserves a government that is responsive to its citizens. I think you deserve the best in terms of fiscal management, making sure that we have the highest bond rating possible, that you deserve the best in terms of how we interact in terms of our customer service and responsiveness, as well as the level and caliber of employees. We need to make sure as we deliver governmental services, we're only as good as the talent that we're able to attract and retain. And so we need to make sure that our workforce has the best talent that we can possibly attract to this market. The Grand Rapidians deserve no less.
And that takes us to our last section, and that is mobility. So mobility for all. So regardless of your resources or your ability itself, you should have access to different options that work for you and that fit your family's needs. And so the last section around mobility for all, it has a number of priorities. We know that we need a comprehensive approach. Typically, I'm hearing about parking. That is often a topic of conversation, both downtown and in neighborhoods. I think the double-edged sword of being a growing, strong community with a lot of economic development going on is that we have greater needs for parking. And so we have had ongoing conversations, and I'll let the city manager jump in on this as well. We know that we need a comprehensive approach when it comes to parking, that we need to have availability of parking for a number of price points. And so if you can't afford to park right downtown all day, we need to have options for you. So some of the work we've been doing is with our Mobile GR Commission, and we are looking at how do we make sure that we have multiple options for people that meet their needs. So you may have seen last year, late last year, we rebranded the Dash, so our downtown area shuttle. We have new routes for that. We also increased service to not only go later into the evening, but also all weekend. And we have seen a significant increase in ridership after those changes. We know we need to work in partnership with the Rapid around public transit to make sure that that service is meeting the needs and that we are looking towards the future of mobility and the changes that are likely to come with changing technology. We know that we need to be able to meet the needs of people and have mobility on demand. There's lots of conversations, not just in our city, but in cities across the country around car share and bike share. And you've seen these probably in other cities, e-scooters. So we know that we need a comprehensive approach. And then on top of that, we need to be prepared for potentially autonomous vehicles. And that is all encompassing under the Mobility for All section in the strategic plan. But we know it's a critical issue. It's a critical issue in neighborhoods and with families, but also with businesses. We know that it's a priority, and we are working with them to make sure that it's not a hindrance to growth.
Great. And I would just add, in terms of mobility for all seasons.
Yes.
And what was pretty evident during a recent snowstorm, people still want to get out and access the community in a pedestrian way. And so we need to think about ways in which we can provide more accessibility and make our community walkable all year round, even when there is a lot of snow on the ground. And so I know that there's been thoughts and concerns about having more, crews do a great job clearing the streets, and I think there are opportunities to look at ways in which we can create more mobility by making sure the sidewalks are accessible as well.
Yeah, and I should add, I know, and especially in light of last week and the winter storm, we know we also need to find solutions to make sure that bus stops and shelters are clear so that people can utilize those regardless of the weather and even if there's a snowstorm. And we're working with the Rapid on that right now. And the other thing I'll add to what the city manager said earlier at the start of the program, you know, just my thanks and all of our thanks to our public servants who were out working last week 24 hours a day, police, fire, our snowplow drivers, 311, but also to the Rapid. You may have noticed that the Rapid buses did not stop during the snowstorm. They were out there every day. They, just like many of us who drove, had challenges, but they were there and they were a reliable source for people who may not have been able to drive, but still had to make it to that job or get somewhere that they had to go. So just a word of gratitude to everyone, not just the neighbors who pitched in and the residents who took care of each other and the warming shelters that opened, everyone who really came together as a community to help last week, but a big shout out to the Rapid bus drivers as well.
Okay, Mayor. Looks like we have our first question, and the first question asks, how will we make sure that our next police chief is committed to equity and strong relationships with the community? And I think a couple of things. One, the next police chief will have to be a person who has proven to have done that in the past. The best indication of future performance is sometimes based on past experiences. And so I will be looking for a police chief that has that kind of track record of collaboration with community, who understands the 21st century principles of community policing and policing with community and not just to community. But also a chief that is real clear on their job is to make sure that our community remains safe and to enforce the law. And so that will be done based on, we will have a very engaged process in which we will be getting feedback from members of the community. The finalists, I envision the top 2, 3, or 4, whatever that number is, to have an opportunity to engage with community and also be part of many panels in which we will assess whether or not he or she has those qualities. Mayor, I think the next question's for you.
All right. So the question is, what is the ordinance for odor control in regard to marijuana grow in residential neighborhoods? So the first thing is, and we'll make sure that we post this online. We'll post the full ordinance that was adopted last year that regulates grow operate, or really 5 different types of marijuana facilities, including grow operations. So there is language within the ordinance that has requirements around systems to make sure that the smell is contained. We learned quite a bit from reaching out to other cities really across the country, including many of the cities in Colorado who were kind of early adopters and went through a number of experiences in their own community, and we heard from them that odor was a problem in some areas. But the thing to recognize about the ordinance is that there are significant setbacks from residential areas, and that grow operations are only allowed in certain districts. So the ordinance is broken down, and you'll be able to see there's actually a map on our webpage that identifies where different types of facilities can be operated. And so grow operations are in industrial spaces. They are able to also do processing there, and dispensaries if they seek out that type of permit and approval. And then there are additional requirements for, I shouldn't say additional, there are different requirements for transporters and testers. And so it's a little confusing sometimes, but I want to assure you that we talked about the issues and concerns that people had around odor, and we built in language to make sure that not only there's clear guidance around that, but also that we'll be able to enforce it if there is a problem. Okay.
And we have another question that's just come in. Thank you, and continue to send us questions. Good questions. Appreciate it. Would we ever consider issuing a snow emergency in our city to get the cars off the street so plows can do their job better, can do their job? Would we also consider opening city parking lots for free and ask private parking operators to do the same? That's a very good question, and I will start with what we've recently done. I think during the recent storm, we realized there were some people who, for a variety of reasons, were unable to move their cars, whether or not they were not in town or because the weather was so inclement, couldn't find another safe place to park the cars. And once we realized that GRPS had closed, and I want to thank Superintendent Neal and her staff for the partnership. They offered an opportunity for us to offer residents to park in school parking lots, which immediately cleared the street and provided an opportunity for our plows to get through. And so I think that does serve as a model, and I think we need to consider that in certain emergency conditions, not only using assets within the school district, but also city offices as well, since we, during that time, now that's unprecedented. My appreciation is school district may have closed before, but the city itself has rarely closed. I think it's been over 20 plus years since that's happened, but this was unprecedented. So the answer is yes. I think that's certainly an option that we could consider in the future should we need those resources, but I think the model that we just recently used with the neighborhood schools, particularly on the days that they close because of weather related issues, may offer us an opportunity to have a place where vehicles can park while we plow streets.
Yeah, great. All right, next question. What exactly are you and the commissioners doing to make sure people who want to live here can afford to do so? So this has been one of the most important issues that the City Commission has been working on for several years now. And it actually started, I would say, about 3.5 years ago when a group of community members, quite a few, I think there were almost 200 folks who came together talking about how do we make sure that we're planning for the future, knowing that we were starting to have some pretty significant issues around people being able to afford in the city, to afford to live in the city. And so great housing strategies came together, and from that, folks broke up into committees and they came up with a whole list of recommendations. Shortly after that, the City Commission took a look at all of those recommendations and identified, okay, which ones can we move on, which are priorities for us. And the complexity of this issue is that we have to identify what we can influence with the resources that we have, and there's a lot of other players that impact affordability. We have great partners in the community with our nonprofit housing organizations, but a significant amount of this issue is driven by the private sector. And so what the City Commission has been doing, we have probably about 2 years ago, we worked at length looking at best practices. What could we do under state law? Some things that people want us to do under state law we can't do. So one question that I get asked often, in fact I was just asked it today, why doesn't the city pass inclusionary zoning ordinance? So that's where you require a certain amount of affordable housing with every development. Unfortunately, in the state of Michigan, laws were passed that they don't allow local units to pass inclusionary zoning laws, and so that's not an option. So when you look at what are all of our potential tools in the toolbox, there are some that we're just not able to pursue because of current state law. Now, will that change in the future? Potentially, but as of right now and over the last couple of years, we haven't had that as an opportunity. So the City Commission has taken a really close look at that. We've made a number of policy changes. We've passed a number of resolutions. We've also, just recently in December, we passed 4 changes to our zoning ordinance, looking at what we could do to incent infill housing. Ultimately, our goal is to make sure that we have mixed housing, mixed income housing throughout our entire city. So regardless of your income, if you want to live in the city, you should be able to find a place to live in the neighborhood of your choice. So a couple things we've done, I'll just give you a bullet point, and we can make sure if you have additional questions you can reach out to us and we'll give you that. So a couple things City Commission has done. We are currently in the process of supporting a eviction prevention program with our district court. So that's a pilot project that we're doing to try to prevent folks from being evicted. We have made adjustments to our down payment assistance program for people who are low income. We have worked really closely with our nonprofit partners to get support from MISHDA, which is the Michigan Housing Development Authority, to get support for low-income housing projects. And we were actually incredibly successful last year. Just in the fall, we had 6 of our low-income housing projects supported by the state. That's fantastic. Those will be, we'll be breaking ground on those this year, and they're in a number of neighborhoods in the city. The area that the City Commission is really concerned about is kind of that missing middle, as we call it, so folks who don't qualify for low-income housing but can't afford market rate housing. And how do we make sure that there's affordable housing available to those individuals and families? And that's where we've been working really closely with developers. So we just broke ground, or I should say did a ribbon cutting on a project on Michigan Street that has mixed income units throughout the entire development. And that to me is a model for the future and what we're going to continue to try to incent. But it's a big issue. Know that it's a priority for us, and we're continuing to look at what we can do on the policy level to try to drive affordability and housing throughout all of our neighborhoods in the city.
And I think, Mayor, I just got digitally connected on my phone here to interact.
I don't even have my phone with me.
Well, you can share right now. I just pulled up the plan online, and if you, for those who are at home, if you go to the economic vibrancy and affordability strategy on the draft plan, all the things the mayor was talking about, our ability to increase housing supply, increase affordable housing supply, reduce those barriers to housing, as well as create services for both displacement as well as other services to help people stay in their homes, is embedded in principle in the strategic plan. And then we would have to put funding and strategies to further some of those efforts. So now I feel like I can interact with our viewers. Next question. Our strategic plan framework. Okay, the external audience is very sophisticated. Is it hard to think of all of these factors for each major and minor decision? Is it doable? In terms of the framework, and I'm assuming that the framework, speaking of the vision and the mission and values and looking at objectives, strategy and the metrics. Obviously, you know, there are times where people are going to make a decision and it would just be based on their expertise and what they've been trained to do. And what my hope is, particularly for major decisions, and as this plan not only becomes a plan that's on the shelf, but also becomes part of our culture, that we will begin to filter what we do and how we think through the elements of the plan. And so I do believe that our values will be able to affect what we do and how we do, and it's something that we should be able to be held accountable for. And that as we think of designing processes, as we think of engaging community, we're doing it through the lens of all of the things that we speak of and aspire to in our plan. And so I do think that it will be something that will be very practical for most of our employees, but specifically when we make strategic decisions on the dais every 2 weeks on the 9th floor. We will be able to go back and as staff determine whether or not it's helping us accomplish a strategic objective. Yeah,
agreed. Okay, next question. What's the status of the river restoration project? So a little bit about background for those of you not familiar with this project. This is the vision and goal to restore our rapids to their natural state. So it includes a couple things. It includes removing the dams that you currently see in the river. It involves building a hydraulic structure, it's kind of a mouthful, hydraulic structure upstream to prevent lamprey from swimming upstream. Lamprey is an invasive species, and right now the 6th Street Dam acts as a barrier, and so we want to make sure that whatever we do with the river, that we make sure that lamprey are not able to go upstream, which could have a devastating impact on our Great Lakes fisheries, or especially the fish in the river. And so the river restoration project envisions once the hydraulic barrier structure is built, we would remove the dams and we would put the boulders back in the river, and we would actually have rapids, which is our namesake, Grand Rapids. So where we are in that project, we are working very, very closely with our state and federal partners. There's about 12 different state and federal departments that we are working with on this project. It's an incredibly complex project, which you can imagine, because we have to look at flooding, so work with FEMA, and we have to look at impact on fish and wildlife, so we're working with them. We're working with endangered species, because we found an endangered species of mussels in the river, so we have to get a permit and approval to move those and monitor those. And then we're working with DEQ and the EPA and MDNR. So there's a whole host of state and federal partners that we are working with on this project. So where we are today, I would say, is twofold. You have Grand Rapids Whitewater, which is leading the fundraising portion of the project. So this is about a $45 million project. It's meant to be a public-private partnership, which in our city we have a lot of successful projects that are built on a private-public partnership. So we'll have public funds from the federal government, state government, and local government, and then those will be matched by private sector funds. So Whitewater is working on that, and they are moving forward with their kind of capital campaign on that side. And then on our side, on the more technical side, we, late last year, so in the fall, in partnership with our partners, we submitted our permits. And so those permits go to a number of state and federal departments, and those permits are currently submitted and being reviewed. And until we hear back about those permits, we are, I would say, kind of at a standstill. I mean, that's a real core part of this project is getting the approval and the permits in place to move forward with the project. We're hoping to hear where we are with that sometime this spring, and so that's, I would say that's really the point we are right now. So permit process and then fundraising process.
Good. Another question. Keep your questions coming. What strategy is being incorporated for snow clearing from bus stops in the city? Lots of questions about snow today. If there's no strategy or current talks, who do I connect with to help in this effort? So there is, I think the mayor was sharing with me even at the last rapid board meeting, there was discussion about snow removal from some of the bus stops. I know post our winter, our recent event here, last week, I've had conversations with members from the Rapid as well as the school district about having a program that would target snow removal from certain bus stops, because I think we have bus stops that are shared both with the public but also with the high schoolers in certain areas of our city. And so those conversations have begun. I had a chance to meet with the superintendent today, matter of fact, to talk somewhat about that. But there are other partners as those stops are throughout our community that we need to engage in, certainly in the downtown area. But also I think there are certain community partners in some of our business improvement districts and even perhaps even some of our SIDs might be also interested in helping us begin a program. While I know that there are other cities that have real aggressive plowing programs for sidewalks and bus stops, we have talked about piloting it in certain part of our communities, and we're in the process of planning. So it will, I think it will help in terms of increasing our mobility and making sure that our city is pedestrian friendly year-round.
Thanks. Next question, does the City Commission plan to change the election cycle? So this question is related to an idea that was brought before the City Commission, I think late last year. So currently the City Commission, our elections fall on odd year, and there are a number of folks in the community who think that they should be on even year. So that idea was brought forward to the City Commission. The City Commission is currently examining that. We have heard from people who are both opposed and supportive of that change. And so I think whenever we're looking at potentially changing our charter or changing our local form of government, we need to do that really thoughtfully and strategically. In addition to the question about elections and when they should be held locally, you know, whether that's even year or odd year, there's also been ideas brought to the City Commission related to our ward system and moving from 3 wards to 6, as well as changing how we appoint city commissioners when there's a vacancy. So there's a group in our city who wants to change that and have that be done by special election instead of an appointment process. I think all of these discussions related to our structure of local government are really important questions, and cities often take a look at that, and I think it's incumbent on us to take a look at it, but also to be very thoughtful and strategic and make sure we have all of the information before we make a decision that potentially could impact the future of local government. And so that's where we are right now. I would say it's something that we're exploring and we're looking into and we're researching But as of right now, the City Commission has not decided to move forward on anything until they have more time.
Okay. Next question. What direct initiative do we have in mind to promote equity, specifically targeting the African American community? So I think this planning process, in terms of strategic planning process, is a direct initiative, particularly when we're saying we're being deliberate about equity. And I'm interested in equitable outcomes in all the areas of our plan. Equitable outcomes in housing, equitable outcomes in mobility and transportation, equitable outcome in economic development and prosperity, equitable outcomes in safety, and so on and so forth. And so I look at the lens, I look at the outcomes of our strategic plan through the lens of equity and the lens of innovation, and making sure that they're embedded in each area. Specifically, I think there are some opportunities for our organization. Equity is a conversation that we're having publicly, but there is not a primary person within our organization whose sole focus is to focus on equitable outcomes as there are in other communities. And that person in other organizations may have the title as Chief Equity Officer. And they focus both internally and externally. Internal, looking at workforce composition and the systems that are in place to make sure that barriers are removed. And externally, look at issues regarding contractor, supplier opportunities for contractors, or looking at other ways in which we can engage and communicate with the community in a more equitable manner. And so I think it's not a program, it is a culture, and we continue to have conversations about creating more awareness, both in terms of training and development, both internal in the organizations, but also creating awareness with community partners. But specifically, making sure that we're able to make sure that what we do in terms of measuring outcomes is data driven. And if you follow the data indicates specifically in many areas that people of color are the most disparately impacted by some of the outcomes. And so I plan to make sure that our staff is aware of that, and as we budget, to make sure that the budgets that are developed by the departments are utilizing the equity lens, and that we're budgeting for areas that address specific disparate outcomes.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll add one more thing to that before I answer this next question. In addition to the important work that we're doing internally at City Hall and within our work, I think it's important to note that we're also working really closely with our community partners, specifically around employment. So we know that there are significant disparate outcomes in employment numbers. And one initiative that we're actively engaged in is a partnership with Talent 2025 and West Michigan Works, and it's called Hire Reach, where organizations and companies are joining an effort to look at their hiring practices and use an evidence-based model for hiring that eliminates unconscious bias. So this is the model that was used at Mercy Health. They've seen significant improvements in hiring and diversification of their employees. And they have great evidence, as the city manager said. You have to look at the data. They have great data to back up the value of using this model, a hiring practice that truly does eliminate unconscious bias. So not only is it important for us to do that, but having partners throughout the city and companies come on board and saying that they're committed will also have a direct impact.
And we just recently committed to be part of that as an employer, to look at our hiring practices within the city and see how we can improve those practices.
Yes. So next question is about the annual State of the City address. And do we plan to live stream it again this year? So yes, we do. It's coming up on February 25th. Actually, the city manager will be kicking us off with the welcome that evening. Although I'm still working on my speech, so I should have that done soon. But yes, we'll be doing that February 25th, and you can find that live streamed and tune in that way.
Good. Next question, where does the city's Vision Zero resolution fit into the strategic plan? Is it under safety or mobility? Who will be responsible to champion the continued improvements needed? That's a good question. I think there are some places within the plan where there's multiple areas where there may be an intersection of outcomes. So certainly Vision Zero would affect our ability to move and have more mobility within a city, but also it relates to safety. And I think we're still, defining ownership and responsibility of the strategy. But I certainly think, obviously, our mobile GR and partnering with Grand Rapids Police Department is important, but it just doesn't belong internally to the city. Partnering with the Rapid and other members of the community, even the school district, in terms of make sure that we have safe paths to school. So I think that there will be several people who will be accountable for helping us with our Vision Zero improvement and strategy.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. The energy and effort and time we've put into this is not going to go away. So we know that, and I would say I would agree with the city manager that probably falls under a number of sections of the strategic plan. But we need to make sure that regardless of your mode of transportation, whether you are a pedestrian or on a bike or on a scooter or on a skateboard or in your car, that you are safe in this city. And we know that we need to do the education piece and the enforcement piece, but we also have to make sure that the infrastructure is there. And so you'll see it in multiple places. Even as you look at our Vital Streets plan, we've made a number of investments in ADA compliant ramps, painting crosswalks, making sure that our bike lanes are paved. We just recently, our Mobile GR Commission and community came together and worked on a bike plan, a comprehensive bike plan. The City Commission hasn't adopted it yet, but that work has been done. Again, making sure that we have a plan for all modes of transportation, in addition to some of the work that we're doing around public transit. And then also I should throw in, we didn't bring this up earlier, but this spring we'll be working with May Mobility as we pilot an autonomous shuttle in the downtown area. And so again, as we think about safety, we need to be thinking about future technology, but also making sure that we have the infrastructure for whatever the future holds when it comes to mobility.
Good. Next question. Now that I've been a Grand Rapidian for 5 months, I think 4, but thank you for the added month. What are some of the things that I like about our community? So, one of the things that I really love about Grand Rapids, certainly the people are very welcoming and friendly. This is a great place to live, work, and play. But the fact that our city is so compact and connected, and that you're never really more than 15 minutes away from anywhere in the community is certainly something that makes it real easy to get around, and I love that. I am loving the fact that just personally, I get to access downtown and all of the wonderful places to eat and the wonderful places to visit, and the entertainment and the arts and culture throughout the community is just very accessible. And I think that's what makes partly makes this a special place to live. And the fact that people really care and take a lot of pride in being Grand Rapidians, and so it's been a great experience. I'm enjoying it, and people often ask me, "Am I concerned about the weather?" That's normally the first question, and it's been adventurous to me. It's after spending the majority of my career, all of my career in the South, I was looking for a break in 110-degree weather. Now, I wasn't necessarily expecting minus 30, but certainly even that has been adventurous. So I've had a chance to get out and experience some of the outdoor aspects of winter and ice skating and skiing, and it's been refreshing. Yeah. It's been refreshing.
And I always say, one of the things that I love about Michigan and Grand Rapids is that we're a four-season city. And I always talk about the need for us to embrace winter. There's so many wonderful things about winter, really wonderful things about every season. And I'm glad that our city manager gets to enjoy that with us.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So with that, we are almost out of time. So I'll add my thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. Thank you for the great questions. We'll make sure that we get responses out to those that we were not able to get to tonight. And again, give us feedback on this format. We'll be looking for continued ways to do outreach as well as do additional digital city halls in the future.
Thank you, Mayor. And don't forget to join us on February 19th and the 20th at 6 o'clock. On the 19th, we'll be at the City Commission Chamber, and on the 20th, we'll be at the Wealthy Street Theater. We're giving a brief update on strategic plan, but also allowing the public to engage and talk about what qualities they would look for in helping us build a profile for our next police chief. Thank you so much. And again, we'll post the responses to any questions we didn't answer online. Thank you.